Are we truly understanding the depth and complexity of ransomware threats in today's digital landscape? Well, in today's episode, we're going to delve into the intricate world of cyber threats and the evolving tactics of ransomware actors. Because today, I'm going to be joined by the Senior Vice President and Chief Scientist at Rapid7, a name synonymous with cutting-edge cybersecurity research and insights. And my guest today brings a wealth of experience from his involvement in the law enforcement agencies as a special advisor to the European Cybercrime Centre, EC3, in The Hague. And we're going to uncover the real challenges behind ransomware attacks. Maybe the misconception about the importance of their frequency and why the focus should arguably be instead on the capabilities of these malicious actors. So today I want you to join me in exploring the dark web trends, the rise of zero-day vulnerabilities, and how the cybercrime landscape is shifting in ways we might not be fully prepared for. Now, before I get today's guests on, it's time for me to mention the sponsors of Tech Talks Daily. And in an era where digital security is non-negotiable, legacy managed file transfer tools, they simply don't cut it now. So that's where Kiteworks comes in, revolutionising the MFT landscape with unparalleled security credentials, including the much coveted FedRAMP moderate authorization. This isn't just about compliance, though. It's about offering a secure, efficient platform for today's remote workforce. So with Kiteworks, you can benefit from advanced file sharing, email security, and customizable integrations, all within a platform designed to safeguard your most sensitive data. So don't let outdated technology compromise your security. Step into the future of secure managed file transfer. Get started today by going to kiteworks.com. That's kiteworks.com, where security meets sophistication. But now it's time to get today's guests on. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to London here in the UK, where today's guest is waiting to join us. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell everyone listening a little about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, hi, I'm Raj Samani, Senior Vice President and Chief Scientist at Rapid7. So what does that do? Well, so it's quite a broad role. Some of you may have heard of the likes of Metasploit. So Metasploit is one of the things that I look after, but also there's threat research, vulnerability research, tracking malicious actors, gathering intelligence, making sure that goes inside our products to protect customers. Basically a really fun job.
We've had a couple of people from Rapid7 over the years. I think it was Jason Hart. I'm not sure if he's still there. And I think it was Gadi Nawar as well. I appreciate it's a huge company. Do you know any of those?
Yeah, Jason and I are very close friends. So he's great. You know, he talks a lot about operationalizing security, which I think is often overlooked. You know, we kind of focus on the, tracking nation states and the kind of headlines, but actually how a company kind of applies its security is something that's often overlooked. So yeah, Jason really takes that good fight forward.
Fantastic. And one of the things I try and do every day on this podcast is try and demystify some of those big tech buzzwords that we hear about and everything across the threat landscape too. And one of the reasons I was excited to get you on the show today is given your perspective that the sheer number of ransomware attacks is actually less significant than the capabilities of the attackers. Can you elaborate on that school of thought and how this shift in understanding could impact the way organizations should prepare for and ultimately respond to ransomware threats?
So we've been dealing with ransomware for, many years, well over, I think, the advent of it's kind of over a decade old. Of course, it kind of came about many years before that. And I remember when it first started to become an issue, predominantly it was a consumer problem. For example, the average ransomware payment was a couple of $100. I mean, it wasn't something that businesses needed to worry about. And the volume was enormous. But round about kind of 2015-16, we saw a shift where it started to go after healthcare. And I remember there was a case in the US where a hospital was held to ransom, and the story was, hey, people are now having to be turned away from hospitals because effectively somebody opened an email. I mean, that sounds ridiculous, but somebody clicked on a link. And of course, what we're dealing with now is a scenario in which actually that's just expanded. And what used to be a ransomware payment of about $200, around about 2-3 bitcoins, because Bitcoin wasn't worth a lot then. We're now dealing with a scenario in which, well, I think last year, I think 23, the number of ransomware payments tracked exceeded $1 billion. And the average ransomware demand is 6 figures. And it's because actually the threat actors have got really, really good. And, we kind of, in 2016, I co-founded an initiative called No More Ransom, where we tried to at least provide another option for people to not have to just pay a ransom. But of course, we're dealing with a scenario whereby it's very, very organized and in some cases potentially even kind of backed by nation states. And so that's the issue we're dealing with. We're dealing with a multi-billion-dollar industry.
And when researching you before you came on the show, I was reading how you've highlighted many times the increasing exploitation of zero-day vulnerabilities by ransomware actors. So on that side of things, anything you could share around the implications of this trend for cybersecurity defences and ultimately how organisations might be able to better protect themselves against such unforeseen threats?
Well, and that's the holy grail of cybersecurity, or certainly sort of threat actors, is to break into a company using something that nobody else knows about. Because, of course, potentially, unless there's what we call compensating controls, there is no real defense against that, because you don't know that you've got a, for want of a better word, like an open window. And what we saw, I think, kind of last year, it was kind of about May time, was there was an attack against a file transfer software, or rather there was a vulnerability against a file transfer software. And, we got called into an incident a few days before the advisory came out. And it turned out that actually what we were dealing with was criminals had broken in using a vulnerability against a piece of software that nobody really had in their radar. And a few days passed, and of course, the advisory came out, and we were quoted in the advisory because we'd already done a considerable amount of analysis. But it was like a few days later, we were actually sitting and talking about this, because we were dealing with, I think, 3 major vulnerabilities, what we call emergent threats at the same time. And I asked the team, I said, look, what do we know about this particular attack? And they said, look, everything seems to point to a ransomware group. And I remember kind of questioning it afterwards, going, well, that's not really their modus operandi. Like typically, a ransomware group would break in using kind of stolen credentials. Typically remote desktop protocol was the most common entry vector and has been for like years. And, they'd buy credentials at these dark web kind of shops, these RDP shops. And I didn't believe it was them, quite frankly. I pushed back and I was like, look, we need more evidence. Like, we can't, if this is them, then this is a fundamental shift and change. And of course it was the Klopp ransomware group. And then all of a sudden we started going, well, hang on, look, they've increased their capability exponentially overnight. Like how did this happen? And then over the last couple of months, we've been dealing with these critical issues, these 0 days or these critical vulnerabilities that are being exploited by ransomware groups at a rate and a pace of change that we've never witnessed before. Like last week, I think. Actually, to put it into perspective, I remember there was a position where we were like 1 a quarter. Back in Heartbleed days, it was more than a year. And at the moment, I think this year alone, we're at about 14 now, because there was another one just recently. I think there was a 14 issues last week. And so you think, wow, okay, 14 already this year, that's like just a touch over 1 a week.
Yeah.
That's something that we've never witnessed and never experienced before. And of course, it does mean that we've got to change the way that we approach how to protect, our businesses and our livelihoods, really, because that's what we're talking about.
And you mentioned those dark web shops there. And of course, the ease of hiring skilled individuals from the dark web has been a game changer for some of these ransomware groups that we're talking about. So how do you see this impacting the future of cybercrime? And again, you've talked about the scale of the problem. What measures should be taken to counteract this trend?
So yeah, it was 2013 actually. I wrote a paper called Cybercrime Exposed, and at the time, I was doing a lot of work with Europe. Actually, I still am with Europol's European Cybercrime Centre, EC3, and the paper focused on this cybercrime as a service or cybercrime kind of ecosystem, and it was an emerging area. So it was, if you wanted to buy stolen credit cards, heck, if you wanted to put a hit out on somebody, like it was all there for you. And Troels Orting, who was the head of EC3 at the time, he basically wrote the foreword for me, and he said, today you don't need any technical skills to be a cyber criminal. You just need a means to pay. And that was 2013. And of course, we've seen, my apologies, that was one of the applications I did. We've seen the kind of evolution and growth of this ecosystem where you don't need to be technically skilled in order to carry out an attack. But I think that kind of belies the actual problem, which is, okay, well, yes, there's a ton of attacks where you've got, individuals that aren't particularly capable, that have these, UIs or these management consoles in order to carry out attacks, and they're basically spoon-fed by the developers, i.e. the criminals. But of course, what we see, though, is criminals effectively outsourcing operations of an attack to people that are very technically skilled, which ultimately makes the attack bigger and more impactful than it could be. So, for example, we talk about ransomware. In the past, okay, it was via email. Well, okay, that's something that we know. Don't click on links, don't pay, and so forth. But what we see in attacks, the likes of Colonial Pipeline, for example, or the likes of Clop, the ones behind the MOVEit attack, what they're doing is they're breaking into an organization, they're burrowing themselves inside, they're effectively exfiltrating or stealing data, and they're doing this in hours. And that demands a special set of skills. So I sound like Liam Neeson here, but it's a very particular set of skills whereby, somebody breaking into an organization and doing lateral movement and exfiltrating data is very different to somebody that's writing pieces of code in order to encrypt their data. And so what that means is that we're seeing a level of innovation growing considerably because they have the opportunity to be able to outsource components of the attack to people that, for example, are very good at, hunting for these O-days or, understanding an environment and taking it over. And I think those are some of the challenges that we face as we're seeing, for want of a better word, a professionalization in how criminals act. And, the old adage of, it's somebody in a hoodie and it's in a basement. Yeah, that's kind of, I would say maybe 5 to 10 years ago, really.
Then also just expanding on that, your work with multiple law enforcement agencies, I think that also provides a unique insight into the fight against cybercrime. And obviously you probably can't share too much, but is there anything you can share around that collaboration between the private sector and law enforcement and how that relationship has evolved and what can be done to maybe strengthen that partnership?
Well, actually, and we have to remember that it's also, the role media plays in all of this. Because, I think the first one we did was the B-Bone botnet. So if you have a chance, just you can go back. It was a few years back. And we found a malicious downloader that was effectively infecting computers across the globe. And what we were able to do with law enforcement, we were able to seize the infrastructure, sinkhole the domain, and therefore anybody that was infected, there was no payload, right? Because we effectively own the infrastructure. But of course, their computers were still infected. So what we did was we actually prepared a virus removal tool specifically for this malware, and we were able to view how many infections there were. And it was incredible because our initial estimates were, there's 12 to 15,000 computers across the globe that are infected. And on day one, we had 37,000 computers connecting to our sinkhole domains.
Wow.
So we quickly went about kind of working with the media to notify everybody across the globe and say, hey, look, by the way, if if you get a notification or you've heard about this, just download this free tool. It will remove the malware from your computer. And we were able to watch it in real time as to how effective our campaign was. And the remarkable thing was, I think I kind of expected over the first week to us to go from 37,000 a day to at least 30,000.
Yeah.
But the number barely changed. And I think these are the challenges that we face, which is when we talk about cybersecurity, I think you kind of touched on it. It's like a dark art.
Mm.
It's not. People think, okay, well, if I get infected with a piece of, computer virus, it just makes my computer run slower. But actually, the impact is often considerably worse. I mean, I talked about the attacks on healthcare. We saw the Colonial Pipeline attacks and the impact that it had on people's ability to be able to get fuel. We saw the impact that it had on global meat supply, and I think these are the challenges that we face, which is we're often seen as a kind of extension of the IT department. But if you are impacted with ransomware as a company, then actually the impact could be catastrophic. We've seen examples like this, and of course, I want to be careful not to spread fear, uncertainty, and doubt. But I think there is this kind of disconnect on the impact of cybersecurity and the reality, or the perception of the reality of cybersecurity. It is not a typical extension of the IT network. It has to be part of, the risk register of every company across the globe. It has to be a board discussion, and it has to be a political topic whereby if we as a nation are being targeted and our businesses are being compromised, we've got to be seen as the safest place to do business. And I think those are some of the things that if I could have a magic wand, it would be about making sure that the elevated agenda is not just a talking point, but we actually implement accordingly.
And if we reflect for a moment on some of those recent ransomware campaigns from MOVEit or SysAid, for example, you've mentioned a few already, but what are some of the newer tactics that ransomware attackers are employing, and how should cybersecurity strategies better adapt to address these evolving methods? Because it's a constantly moving target. It's like a big game of whack-a-mole sometimes, isn't it?
Well, yeah. So you've got the broader question of, well, can we hold people accountable? Because of course, there are many countries where we don't have, a mutual legal assistance treaty or like all these MLATs. And there are many people carrying out these attacks without any concern about being held accountable, because of course they live in countries which we don't have the ability to kind of extend our reach into. And so I think, look, as we think about how that's going to evolve, well, quite frankly, it was 2013 when I wrote that paper, Cybercrime. Yeah. There was a statistic I found, and I couldn't find it afterwards. But I think the FBI wrote something like, the actual number of physical bank robberies are actually decreasing.
Yeah.
And what we're dealing with in the world is where crime is evolving. So it's not, hey, what's the evolution of cybercrime? Actually, what's the evolution of crime? And subsequently, the number of, physical related kind of crimes are decreasing. And now you can carry out a crime against a country and never set foot inside that country, and therefore never potentially be under the, within the reach of law enforcement. From a technical perspective, that's an issue because, these individuals, I think I said to you last year, they'd made $1 billion. And I remember when the Gandcrab crew retired, they made the statement that they'd made $2 billion. Now, a lot of that goes in towards, luxury goods, and they post stuff on Instagram, many of these criminals. But, there's a lot of investment going into, the redevelopment of code. And so we think about ransomware. Hey, ransomware used to be about encrypting data. Well, actually, now it's about exfiltrating data. So ransomware was an attack on availability. Now it's an attack on confidentiality. Now the question becomes, well, okay, what are they doing next? Where's the next area of focus? One would argue maybe they don't need to innovate as much because they're already making, billions of dollars. but actually we are becoming more dependent on technology. We're leveraging more IoT devices, and and I think we just have to kind of look at this as an area where they will continue to innovate, and quite frankly, they've got millions of dollars to do it.
And if any business leader listening to our conversation today, maybe set up a few alarm bells or light bulb moments of, hey, I get it, I understand the scale of the threat here. What would you say are the key components of an effective cybersecurity preparedness and response plan are, and that organisation should be thinking about and maybe implementing? I appreciate it is a huge, huge question, but are there any key components that you can just share with anyone listening?
Yeah, so I think things have changed, and we can never like we used to approach it from a very binary perspective, whereby, hey, there's a vulnerability, we need to apply a patch and monitor. It used to be security updates on a regular basis, typical cyber hygiene, but I think the rate and the pace of change and the rate and pace of innovation from threat actors means that maybe you can't wait for, the next change control window to apply your updates on your environment. Maybe what you need to do is just kind of have a strong understanding of where your vulnerabilities are, what applications you use. And then if you gather intelligence around, okay, well, we know that this vulnerability is being exploited. Okay, we might need to implement security controls or updates in order to protect ourselves. I think context now starts to become crucial. I know obviously you mentioned SysAid or you mentioned MOVEit, like everything that I'm pushing the team and everything that we're publishing, and we do a considerable amount through open source. We release an enormous amount freely. So we have Attacker KB, we have Velociraptor, the DFI off technology we have, and all of this is released freely. Metasploit, for example, like it's the cornerstone of the open source community for decades now, and everything we're trying to do now is just trying to provide that context. And so, within Attacker KB, every time we publish something, what we now do is we now say to people, hey, by the way, this is being exploited in the wild. So that's a level of context where you say, okay, well, if we are vulnerable to this and criminals are exploiting this, then what we need to do is put in our security measures or updates quicker and faster than we would normally do. The other thing we're doing is we're putting tags in to say, hey, look, this is the likely threat group behind it. So now, if, for example, it's a ransomware group, well, shoot, I need to put mechanisms and controls in place to protect myself. And I think that this is where intelligence and context starts to become absolutely critical. You have to balance the potential risk against the business needs and requirements. And I think, going to a business, like I said, we were at 13 this year alone. If you went up to the change control team and said, hey, we need to bring down our production network, our production systems 13 times this year alone in the last 6 weeks, chances are they won't take your calls anymore.
Yeah.
Right. That would have had a material impact on a business's, bottom line. And so I think we've got to start to consider the context and making sure that we have the best intelligence. And, what we, like, for example, one of the things we did was we provided free threat hunting rules. So if you wanted to know, hey, was there any evidence of my network being compromised by the Clop ransomware group? We provided free threat hunting rules for you to look for that. And then, of course, we provided, new rules that told you what had been exfiltrated. And again, that was released freely. And so I think it's about finding those information sources that, credibly add to your triage process around how you manage and how you handle risk. And then you have the opportunity to be able to be quicker and faster and actually more effective. And I think that has to be the bottom line with regards to how you approach risk in an organization. It's not security, it is risk, right? That's effectively what we're talking about.
100%. And I also think if we look in our personal lives, I think most people listening, I would hope everyone has this almost inherent streetwise vigilance when you go out at night, how you carry valuables, etc. But now those bad guys are now committing those same crimes online. Many users don't have that education or cyber defense lesson almost And I think much of that is down to education, and we need more than that annual compliance training exercise where you just tick next, 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 and then you're done for another year. So how important is cybersecurity education in combating things like ransomware, and what role do you believe it plays when preparing the next generation of cybersecurity professionals too?
Well, so for me, it was, so I used to be a CISO.
Yeah.
And, we invest so much money on awareness, and I'm going to be flamed here, but I don't think it really worked, because everybody knows about cybercrime. Everybody knows about, like my dad, for example. My dad got scammed for, a couple of $100 because somebody had managed to grab his credit card and was using it to book flights. And I remember getting a phone call from him saying, "Oh yeah, look, someone's stealing money from my credit card." And I was like, "Have you received any strange calls?" And he goes, "Yeah, I received one from the bank." And I was like, "Well, did you give me your credit card details?" He goes, "Yeah." And I was like, "But Dad, I've told you like 1,000 times, don't do this." And it, honestly, I sit at the dinner table, and I'm not, the guy that keeps talking about his job, but often I will talk about, these are the types of scams that there are. So I don't think there was an issue about awareness, because I think people do understand about security and cybersecurity and scams and fraud, but there's no understanding of the types of campaigns that are going on. And, when I was a CISO, one of the things we did, which was really effective, was we recorded, because we ran multiple call centers, and we actually recorded a ton of conversations from these scammers trying to extort data out of our call centers. And then what we did was we actually then, made those recordings available as part of the training and the induction, and we regularly repeated it. And we actually measured the effectiveness of that, because we used to do this thing called tiger teaming, where we would actually call the call centers and try it ourselves, and we would be able to measure, just how strong the human firewall was. And actually, that was a lot more successful, because we were able to contextualize the attack for people to understand, because all of us, we're all human beings. And if you've read, Cialdini's work, he's a psychologist around influence, there are subconscious levers that you can use to influence people to do anything you want. And so they were using these tactics and these techniques, and we were able to demonstrate and show that. And I think then people started to get an understanding. And so if we start to contextualize the issue and we say, well, okay, here's a phone call from a bank that's clearly fake, and listen to what they're asking you for. That, I think, is a way that we can start to create that understanding.
Based on your experience and insights into dark web trends, any future cybersecurity threats that you might see on the horizon, and anything organisations and individuals can do to prepare to defend against them? Again, huge question there, and the speed of technological change at the moment, it's almost impossible to predict what's coming next. But is there anything that keeps you up at night, or that you're following closely?
Yeah, I mean, look, there are those kind of attacks that you read and you hear about that that worry you, right? So, for example, the deep fake related scam calls, where people have been contacted by their kids, saying, I'm in trouble, send me money. Why? Of course, that concerns me. And we've done a lot of work around adversarial machine learning, where we look at the use of machine learning or AI from threat actors in order to carry out attacks. But look, I think I've been fairly consistent with what I've said in the past, which is, why do they need to invest in machine learning or data scientists when they can break into a company using the password? I mean, at the moment, it's just, at the moment you can buy credit cards for less than the price of a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
At the moment, you can buy credential access into major organizations for pounds, literally just a few pounds. If we're going to succeed, it's going to succeed by making it more difficult. And we talked a lot about ransomware, but that's a perfect example, whereby we started in a world in which ransomware was emails and encrypting data. And as an industry, we got together, we launched No More Ransom. Nearly $1 billion has not gone into the hands of criminals because of this innovation, because of this collaboration. Now, all of a sudden, people were told, hey, don't pay. And by the way, back up your data. And if you don't have a backup, by the way, there might be free decryption tools. We've got nearly, 200 free decryption tools available. And that's worked. And what that's meant, though, is threat groups now say, well, okay, we're now going to have to innovate. And we're not now just going to send email. What we'll do is we'll compromise RDP. Well, okay, we've got the advice and the guidance about RDP out. People are locking that down more. Okay, so now you're going to have to go out and do vulnerability research and burn O-days in order to break into companies. And now it's not just about encrypting data, it's about exfiltrating data. So that's a really good example of this kind of game of cat and mouse, where criminals would come out with one tactic. We respond as an industry, and we effectively reduce their efficiency, but they will respond. They're backed by millions of dollars, and we respond in kind. And so if I think about what the future of cybersecurity holds and what the future for digital business holds, it's an area of continual innovation, not just from big tech companies, not just from organizations, but also from criminals, because they want to keep making money for obvious reasons. They don't want to put themselves in danger and go into a bank like they used to, like criminals used to, decades ago. And so I'm trying to be positive. I'm trying to think of something positive to end with. Yeah. And it's, I think that's just the reality, right? Is it positive? I mean, probably not, saying criminals are going to evolve, but then so will we.
Well, I've loved chatting with you today, sharing your insights and your expertise, etc. And before I let you go, I've got a great idea to let us finish on a positive note today, because, of course, if you look back throughout your career, how you gain those experiences and insights, none of us are able to achieve any degree of success without a little help along the way. So is there a particular person that you're grateful towards? Maybe they saw something in you, invested a bit of time in you, or just played a part in your journey, helping you get you where you are today. Who would that person be? Let's give him a shout out.
Well, so there's many, like Ed Gibson, for example, legal attaché was clearly one, and Andy Ely. But like the one constant in my life is my wife. When I finished my master's a long time ago, I went and did, I think, like 35 professional exams in everything from, Cisco products to Checkpoint products. I mean, for the first almost 2 years of our married life, I never went out like on a weekend. I was just constantly working and studying, and she continues to be that rock for me today. So, hopefully she's listening and I'll get some extra brownie points. But if not, it's still, she's always been there. So, yeah, it's her.
Oh, what a beautiful answer and a perfect moment to end on. But just for anyone listening, wanting to dig a little bit deeper on anything we talked about today, where would you like to point everyone listening?
Can I say Twitter? I hate using the term X, but X, Twitter, LinkedIn, I guess. But yes, those are probably the only social networks I currently use.
Awesome. Well, I'll add links to those platforms and, of course, the Rapid7 website. And we've covered so much in a short amount of time today, from the number of ransomware attacks not necessarily matter, and it should actually be worrying about the capabilities of those ransomware actors that we're reading about, not to mention zero-day vulnerabilities, how they're being exploited by ransomware attackers, and the fluidity of skills to hire on those dark web marketplaces that we keep reading about. It's so many big trends there, but we did end on a positive note, and just a big thank you for sharing your expertise, your insights, and how businesses and organisations can prepare for some of these attacks and ensure they don't happen. Keep up the big fight, my friend, and I'll speak to you again soon.
Thank you so much.
I think it's clear that the battle against ransomware is far from over, but the tactics and strategies of cyber criminals is evolving. But so are the methods to combat them, which is such an important part to remember. And for me, today's conversation has been enlightening to learn more about the complexities that surround ransomware, along with the critical importance of focusing on the capabilities of threat actors rather than the volume of attacks. And in a world where cyber threats are becoming increasingly sophisticated, I think it's pivotal to try to stay ahead with experts like today's guest in guiding the way as we continue to navigate these digital challenges. Let's ponder the measures that we can take to bolster our defences, and also discuss the role of collaboration in achieving that much sought after cyber resilience. But the question, I want to put the microphone in front of you now. What steps are you taking to protect your digital life, your world, your work? And how can we collectively foster a safer cyber environment together? Please share your thoughts and join this conversation by emailing me, techblogwriter@outlook.com, Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, LinkedIn, Instagram, just @NeilCHughes. You'll find me there too. But it's time for me to check out now. So until next time, stay safe, stay informed, and I'll meet you back here tomorrow. Same time, same place. Bye for now.